Good morning, everyone. And this is our Ways and Means Committee, more specifically the Budget Subcommittee. And I'm the chair, John Quincy, and I'm joined at the dais by Council Members Palmisano, Frey, Goodman, Warsami, Council President Johnson, Council Member Andrew Johnson, Long Yang, Council Vice President Glidden, Bender. We got here Reich. Who else is down there? And Councilmember Gordon. And we're certainly a quorum of this committee, and we'll be able to begin today's markup session for the mayor's recommended 2018 budget, which will then form the basis of a formal recommendation to the full city council. This past Wednesday evening, the city council conducted the first of its two public hearings on the recommended budget. We'll conduct a second public hearing prior to adoption next Wednesday evening, beginning at 6:05 in this chamber. Once that public meeting is concluded, the full council will take up the recommended 2018 budget, including any further amendments for final action. Today's markup session gives all of the council members the opportunity to raise questions or concerns about the departmental budgets or other matters related to the proposed 2018 budget, including the ability to bring forward any amendments which, if approved today by this committee, will be incorporated into the final recommendation for the council on Wednesday. Before we get started, I want to offer some special thanks to the terrific team for this committee. First, our financial department and our CFO, Mark Ruff, Deputy Finance Officer Lori Johnson, and our Budget Director, Micah Intermill. Mark, Lori, and Micah have certainly guided our review of the mayor's budget recommendations over these past many weeks and have done a significant amount of work to ensure that council members had the data analysis and insight to make some informed decisions that have brought us to this point in the process. The city is fortunate to have them and their colleagues in the finance department. I also wanted to say a special thanks and recognition to our clerk for this committee, Kelly Giesler. He's done a fabulous job managing our schedule and keeping track of our progress and ensuring that all of our budget documents are available for public access. So colleagues, we've spent the last few months conducting hearings. I think we've had more than 29 different public hearings. That's about 28 or 29 more than the U.S. Senate has taken up on their budget, but that's a separate issue. It's been a very busy time, so I'd like to highlight the process that we're going to follow today, starting from the same page. We've reviewed the process for today's markup. After we've reviewed that process, I'll take any questions about the process, and then we can begin with our agenda. So by tradition, what we usually do is have the chair sponsors a series of amendments that are more technical in nature. And these items are intended to help clarify the mayor's original intent and proposal and respond to developments since the mayor presented the budget back in end of August. This includes a lot of changes from federal and state levels, as well as Metropolitan Council, that can impact the city's budget. These technical amendments are usually sponsored by the committee chair and are developed by departments with assistance from the finance department. So this first action we'll consider today is a series of what we're calling the technical amendments by the chair, and these amendments have been bundled together as one package labeled number 1 in your amendments package, or packet that's in front of everybody. After all the technical amendments are included in that bundle have been addressed, I will call for a vote on the entire series of the technical amendments as a single package. After we've discussed those technical amendments, I'll open the floor to amendments from individual council members. The Finance Department has done some preliminary sorting to help us focus our attention on a series of known amendments, which are included in the amendments package. And they've been ordered and numbered in that order, and I intend to bring them forward, starting with amendment number 2, after we address item number 1, which is the technical amendments. So as a reminder, the purpose of today's meeting is to bring forward as many amendments as possible, so staff has ample time to reformat the budget package for final presentation to the council on Wednesday. I understand that there's always late amendments that develop after markup, and we expect that. However, if there are amendments that are ready today which are not included in the prepared amendments packages, we appreciate council members bringing them forward during today's markup session. We'll act on each amendment separately. After all the amendments have been addressed, I'll move approval of the mayor's recommended 2018 budget as amended by this committee for submission to the full city council at its adjourned session on next Wednesday evening, following the second public hearing. So that's the game plan. We're going to take up the technical amendments labeled number 1. Then we'll take up the other prepared amendments submitted by council members in the order shown in the packet. Then we'll open the floor for further amendments. And after we've disposed of all of those amendments, take a final vote for the entire package recommendation to the council. So are there any questions on that process from council members? Just as a reminder, we are using speaker management, so we encourage everybody to get into that. But if you are not able to get our attention, the red tags are always a source. So let's look at first, as we begin the agenda, we'll look at the technical amendments. I've asked Mr. Intermill if he could briefly summarize these amendments and pause for any questions of each of these technical amendments. Then I plan to move the entire package forward as a package. So, Mr. Intermill, if you could help us walk us through those technical amendment series.
Chair Quincy and members, I'm happy to do so, and thank you for the opportunity. I also, if you'll allow me, before I go into that, I'd like to acknowledge and thank the budget staff.
Please do. My name is good.
Over the last 6 months, as I've onboarded to the city, they've been doing double duty, not only doing their regular jobs, but also teaching me. So Brad Hunnell, Gina Powell, and Jeffrey Murguri, who is not here with us today, have been exemplary in that effort. And we have an addition to our team. Robert Harrison has joined us from the city of San Francisco as a new budget analyst. So again, none of these amendments incur additional general fund or property tax supported expense. Excuse me, in my thank yous, I was remiss in not acknowledging Capital Budget Director Mike Ablin and Jeff Metzen on his team. So again, none of the amendments incurs additional general fund or property tax supported expense. I'll explain each item and any associated fiscal impact. In all cases where additional expense is incurred, fund balance are sufficient to cover the additional expense. So the first item is moving the housing policy coordinator position from the city coordinator to the CPED department. You'll recall discussion during the CPED hearing and the city coordinator to that effect. There's no fiscal impact because it's just a shift of the position. The second item is in the mayor's recommendation, we're showing some receipt of funds for the emergency management department. That those funds actually came in 2017. So those funds have already been received and approved by the council. So we're just taking that out of 2018. Any unspent funds automatically roll over. The next amendment is shifting funds between two programs in the communications department at the request of the communications department. They feel that the video storage and software upgrade is the best, highest use of those funds. The third item is related to the SAMHSA grant. When we were updating the department salaries for current service level targets, we inadvertently increased these grant funds, which should not have happened. And so we're removing an amount of roughly $23,000 just in that correction, and also moving $50,000 from the coordinator to be spent in the health department. This is happening in practice. We're just codifying it in the book. The fifth item is related to the Human Resources Department. They're increasing a position that's currently part-time to be a full-time position. They'll be paying for that additional expense out of their discretionary funds. This is just adding the FTE to their complement. The sixth item is merely aligning the operating section of the book with the capital section of the book to reflect the full budget for art and public places. Not making any substantive change. The seventh item is accelerating the timetable for funding of the Fridley filter plant project. There's an agenda item on next week's Ways and Means agenda to increase the 2017 appropriation, just shifting the timing of these funds. And in doing so, we'll be able to apply for a interest-free loan through the Public Facilities Authority. The next item is in response to an internal audit finding. We received partial reimbursement of approximately $1 million for medical workers' compensation from the Workers' Comp Reinsurance Association from the state. Our budget includes that receipt of revenue, but on the expenditure side, we had netted out the receipt of those funds as well from the expense. And so there was a little bit of double counting as we were showing it. So by reversing out that netting, we're getting back to the actual cost, and we appreciate the internal auditor for catching that for us. The ninth item is a CARS request that had come through and the mayor had approved. It just merely was not picked up in the book. It's additional funding for vehicles for the Transportation Planning and Engineering Division. The 10th item is for fleet services in the IT department. Again, this was a CARS request that was approved, but just was not picked up in the book. The 11th item, I chuckle because it's my favorite item on the list, renaming the Transportation Planning and Engineering Department as the Transportation Engineering and Design Department. The 12th item is related to the Downtown Improvement District, just matching the book to meet the contract that has been approved. And the final item is updating financial policies in the budget book. There are no substantive changes. It's just reordering and clarification of existing policy.
Good. So that is the extent of the technical amendments, is that right?
Mr. Chair, that is the extent of the technical amendments, but in the spirit of technical amendments, we did catch that our math there at the bottom, I apologize, was off a little bit, and both columns should show that the total impact is negative $8,049,713.
Okay, so that's the first change of the technical amendments is actually the total at the bottom on the left-hand side.
The irony hurts.
And the irony hurts, okay. Well, to put this properly in front of us as a package, I will go ahead and move approval of those, and we have a question from Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Intermill, on the self-insurance fund, so essentially, are we decreasing the balance in the self-insurance fund then?
Mr. Chair, Council President Johnson, we, in practice, no, we're not. We're just updating the financial statements to meet the reality of what we'll be expecting.
Okay.
So rather than counting the reimbursement as both a revenue and a lesser expense, we're just counting it once as a revenue.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there additional questions on the technical amendment package from council members? Mr. Intermill, do you have?
I do. Our chief financial officer has just highlighted for me that on the that total impact bottom line, it should say 0.2 FTE, not 2 FTE.
Irony is not lost. 2 of the last 3 columns. Good.
I can assure you that there is no impact to the net levy.
Certainly. Seeing no further questions on these technical amendments, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Those items carry. Thank you very much. So we can now take up the prepared amendment packet. There's a index at the top of the stack. So the first one that we're taking up is labeled number 2, and this is brought forward by Council Members Bender and Frey. Recognize Councilmember Bender for an introduction to that item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This motion by Councilmember Frey and I is a series of changes related to public safety. The goal of the motion is to find matching funds for the COPS grant that we received, which is a federal grant. Overall, the match plus the grant will allow us to hire 10 additional sworn officers beyond what was in the proposed budget. And over time, this enables us to save money as a city because you might remember in the 5-year financial projection, we have planned to increase the number of sworn officers, but this grant allows us to use some of the funds for other things. So this motion also includes slight increases in some of the violence prevention work that is being led by our health department and creates a little bit of shifting around of the community safety strategies. So Part A takes money from the nighttime mobility program that was proposed for downtown and moves it to domestic violence prevention to continue the work that the health department did after Councilmember Palmisano and I found money last year for domestic violence grant programs. Item B uses that same source plus a little bit of money from the collaborative safety strategies to add funds to the proposed budget for the next step hospital-based interventions. Our health department would be happy to provide detailed information to anyone who wants to hear how that program has been going. This is a violence prevention program that serves young people who've been victims of violent crime, and it is highly tied into the work that we're doing with group violence intervention that's showing great results in the community. Item C is detailing how the community safety strategies funding would be allocated based on feedback from the council members who had wards impacted by those funds. So it continues funding for Little Earth and Broadway. It adds a bit of money on Penn Avenue after we heard the testimony from folks in the 4th Ward, and then outside of Lucy Laney School. And then it maintains the funding proposed for the Lake Street area, which is new this year for next year. And then finally, D outlines the funding for the COPS match, which uses primarily the nighttime mobility funding source, as well as a little bit of funds from the proposed community safety liaisons. The impact of this, plus a few remaining motions that will come, is that we will end up with 4 community liaisons proposed in the police department, down from the proposed 8. So that maintains that program in its first year with 4 FTE focused on being community liaisons in the police department. I'm happy to answer any questions. Councilmember Frey may want to make some comments as well.
Are there additional questions or comments on this amendment? Councilmember Frey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Bender gave an accurate recitation of what this amendment is doing. I think it's an excellent opportunity to continue some of the collaborative safety strategies that we're using to utilize the next step hospital-based interventions at the 105,000 marker, which has done some really, really good work. And we're accessing quite a bit of money in federal funding that we wouldn't otherwise have if we weren't willing to match, thus increasing the number of officers on our force. This is a good amendment. I appreciate everyone's work in getting this set up.
Great. Thank you very much. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much, and I think I'm generally supportive of this. I did have a question, maybe just kind of for the holistic view of the community safety collaborative funding. As I recall, there was $100,000 in ongoing funds to support efforts. Is that touched by this amendment?
Perhaps that's a question for Mr. Intermill, if we could help identify, because some of those were one-time sources and some ongoing. So if you could help detail those for us, please.
Certainly, Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon, the $100,000 in ongoing funds for collaborative safety strategies is not touched by this amendment. As you look later in your packet, it may be by future amendments that are taken up.
Oh, okay. I'll be curious to. It looked like maybe it was, and maybe it's moved somewhere else permanently on an ongoing basis. But I appreciate that for this amendment, and we can look at that again. Maybe if one of the authors knows, then I will just note that generally there's this is of course is a large package, and there's a lot of pieces to it. Really appreciate that. It looks like we can expand our Next Step Hospital program to North Memorial. I think that's going to be significant. That's been a successful program that has been operating here at Hennepin County. I will note that I am concerned and a little disappointed about the community safety liaisons. I understand it's a compromise. I agree. We really need to find the matching funds so we can take advantage of this fabulous grant. So I'm glad that we're doing that. I also really appreciated that one of the only thing I think the new chief really wanted in the budget for this year was those eight positions. I think it's good that we'll be preserving 4 in the end of this. And hopefully, if those are very successful, we can fund those in the future. Thank you.
Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question about item C, and I guess, I realize that Lake Street is new to this, and so it's getting $200,000, but I'm looking at this, and Penn Avenue is new to this too, and it's getting only $50,000, and then the other two specific communities, Broadway and Little Earth, are reduced to $50,000 from what they were this past year at $250,000, and so I'm trying to understand what the reasoning is behind that.
Could somebody speak to that? One of the authors, Councilmember Bender?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This proposal maintained the funding that I understood was proposed in the original budget. I don't actually know why the original amounts were landed on. Councilmember Frey and I just circled back with all of the council members whose wards were impacted to do our best to see if we could maintain as much of the funding as possible that had been proposed and then add this amount for Penn Avenue. So I could defer to the council members from the wards. I know Broadway is in the 5th ward, but I don't have a strong opinion myself about how these funds would be allocated among these different areas of the city.
Councilmember Yang, does that help address that question for you? It does
Not particularly, but
Okay.
you can move on.
Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really want to speak about this. I would call it a compromise, but what it does is recognize the pleasant intervention of the federal government to be able to help us address violent crime. The 10 police officers are specifically targeted, and our police department did a good job writing the grant request for addressing violent crime. And this is, just a huge challenge for some communities in this city. And I think the ability to be able to find that match just makes so much sense. So I appreciate everybody's work on this. I think, the addition of Penn Avenue, we had a really moving experience with a group of young people and their principal who came to talk about the shooting on the playground at Lucy Craft Laney School. This is, and then a mom who talked about 3 times. She lives on 36th and Oliver 3 times in her experience in a short time living in the home she's living in now. She's had three shootings happen in near her home. It's a hot zone. The police have defined it as a hot zone. So I'm appreciative of people's willingness to look at allocating some of these collaborative public safety strategy dollars for the Penn Avenue project. I also would just like to point out, this shooting that happened at the school. About a week and a half before that, there was a similar situation at Nellie Stone Johnson School on 26th and it's on 26th and Aldrich North. Same thing. Children on the playground had to dive for cover because people were shooting at each other from the alley and 26th Avenue North, and that didn't make the news either. It's just stunning. Think about what would happen if that would have been Kenwood School or Lake Harriet Community School. Do you think that'd be on the news? I bet it would be. So this is really a chance, I think, to take advantage of the federal government's prioritizing violent crime, gun crime as an issue to be dealt with. Our city has had an initiative over the years of looking at this as a public health issue, which it absolutely is. And this further complements the work that we're doing, which is going to need to be, and has been, but needs to continue as a work that is done by the community, but then also in conjunction with our police department. If you look at the paper today, there are federal indictments that are in place for some gang members that these are the people that are involved in these shootings. So look at the front page of the paper, thank our law enforcement. FBI, DEA, if you look at the ATF is involved in the indictments that came across today. We have to have a community be strong and say we are unaccepting of this violence going on in our community, threatening our children, threatening our ability to go to the grocery store. And we need to have the police help us get after these really bad actors with multiple long histories of violence to be able to make a change in the community.
Thank you. Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a question for the staff, so I just want to clarify that, the series of amendments here come out to the originally proposed $100,000 in ongoing funding for the Collaborative Safety Strategies Program, and that there is still $75,000 for admin fees for the $200,000 for East Lake Street for the Collaborative Safety Strategies Program. So I just want to clarify that those three funding sources remain after all of this, after B and C are, taken into account.
So, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cano, the amendment does not touch the ongoing funds in the Collaborative Safety Strategies
Does
program.
it change it in any way?
The ongoing funding?
The $100,000 in ongoing funding?
No, it does not.
Okay, so it doesn't prescribe any geographic focus to it or anything like that?
This amendment does not. That is
Okay, so the $100 is okay. What about the $75,000 in administrative fees?
So the administrative fees were not called out explicitly in the mayor's budget proposal. I know that an amount had been discussed outside of the document. That continues to be the case here. So the monies that are listed can be used for administrative or programmatic function. So it's not called out, but it also doesn't need to be.
So the $75,000 for administrative fees for the Collaborative Safety Program strategies is intact after these amendments?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cano, let me try and answer it a little bit different way. So in this amendment, what this is doing is taking the of the $475,000 in one-time monies for collaborative safety strategies, of which my understanding is $75,000 were to be used for administrative purpose. It's specifying that within that 475, 350 are to be used in these four ways, in these four communities. And so, again, because the $75,000 was never explicitly called out in the budget book, it's neither touched nor not touched.
Okay, and then just confirming that the Lake Street Community Safety dollars, the 200 that were originally slated, continues to be there.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cano, yes, $200,000 is identified in item C as for the Lake Street community.
So then out of the 475 that were originally slated for collaborative safety strategies, 350 is being used, and what's happening to the other 125? If you could just please clarify for me. This is the first time I read this amendment, so I'm sorry, I'm just trying to understand all of the implications that are being presented here.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cano, that's no problem at all. With this amendment, there would still be $125,000 in the collaborative safety strategies and one-time dollars and $100,000 in ongoing dollars that are not touched by this amendment number 2.
By what? Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there additional questions, comments on this amendment? Not seeing, I'm sorry, Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to thank all the council members who helped put this together. I feel really comfortable with this as a balanced approach to public safety and violence prevention in our community. and I'm really thankful to be able to work with Councilmember Frey to bring forward something that found a significant amount of money for this federal matching grant to allow us to hire more officers, but also preserved and even increased money for violence prevention and community safety strategies. Thanks.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions, all those in favor of amendment labeled number 2, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That item carries. Now on to labeled amendment number 3, Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an amendment that I had suggested I'd be making in the budget markup for Meet Minneapolis, and I'm bringing it forward today. This is eliminating $250,000 from the increase above and beyond what Meet Minneapolis was already receiving to put into public safety efforts downtown, specifically in the Nicollet area, as we did last year. I'll note that this will still leave over $400,000 above and beyond the base budget of Meet Minneapolis. 250 already contracted for the X Games and another 150,000 for customers at the convention center, improved experience. But it does take the money that was allocated for a new website and puts it into public safety strategies downtown. I will note we did eliminate the public safety strategies through the collaborative policing model in the last action. So this is essentially using a different program. It's been my experience in the Loring Park neighborhood that asking neighborhoods to apply for grants for projects and then pay to administer those grants isn't the best way to do something that's already happening. In Loring Park, there's been a collaboration amongst 40 different stakeholders, including probation, Hennepin County courts, Minneapolis Police, Minneapolis City Attorney's Office, Citizens for Loring Park Neighborhood, the Loring Business Association, Friends of Loring Park, and others, in order to address the 6 shootings on the corner of 15th and Nicollet. This would continue along the lines with that work in partnership with the DID. So it doesn't take money from the community safety strategies. It is taking money from one downtown source, Meet Minneapolis, and putting it into a public safety source.
Okay, questions on Councilmember Goodman's amendment number 3, Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can I just ask Councilmember Goodman a question?
Please.
So are we using Public Works as just kind of the pass-through? Okay.
Thank you very much. Additional questions on this item? All those in favor of item number 3, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Thank you. That item passes. Item number 4 is next. If I'm correct in this, it's also a Councilmember Goodman amendment. This is on housing inspection services. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is an item that had come up as a result of the renters' work that a number of people have been doing. This was a suggestion I had made to the department to hire 2 housing inspectors who have a focus on cultural sensitivity and language training. One of the things I've noticed in our tenants' rights work is that the inspections department often becomes feared by tenants who they're trying to help. So they'll come in to try to inspect a unit and there'll be a language barrier or there'll be a lack of cultural sensitivity. The tenants who have a mold or bed bugs or other problem won't be able to communicate with the inspector, and it's creating a problem for us in the context of making sure that housing is safe and also healthy, and it's making our inspectors not help with the system as much as they could. I did ask the department to put this in their budget, and they did, and the mayor declined to fund it. And so that's why we're here today. I would probably have left well enough alone and asked the next mayor to fund this, which I believe he would have. But I had been encouraged by advocates and others to try to figure out a way to do this. And so this does take money from the community safety liaisons as well as collaborative safety strategies to fund 2 FTEs, culturally sensitive, as I would say, separate from the other housing inspectors for this effort.
Right.
And if folks don't want to do it, they don't want to do it. And if they do, they do. That's great.
Thank you very much. Any questions on this amendment? I know it requires allows some flexibility within reg services on how to label that. This is for multifamily, typically called fire inspections, but housing inspectors is what its purpose is. So that's what it's for. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really supportive of this approach. Like Councilmember Goodman, I have huge number of renters in my ward, and one of the things that we hear so strongly from renters advocates is that we haven't been able to properly inspect and make sure that folks are living in good, safe, healthy conditions in their homes. And so I really appreciate this approach. Part of what Councilmember Goodman talked about when she and I spoke about this was the need to have folks who are able to build trust with renters over time. Often when city is coming into people's homes, there's a lot of fear and mistrust. And so that's why the piece of having this being an ongoing program that allows for the continuity of staff was important. So I will be supporting this motion.
Thank you. Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm going to be supporting this motion. I think the dollars that we spend on inspections, housing inspections, are some of the best dollars we spend in our city. I do think, as my colleagues have remarked, that people can get a little fearful, and so the time that is spent in educating people about the positive aspects of housing inspections is really, really important, but it is a huge part of the challenges that we have as a city, and maintaining our housing stock, our apartment multifamily housing stock is essential. Our people do a great job, but they're overworked.
Councilmember Frey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm also very supportive of this amendment as well. I had an additional thought pattern, but I forgot it.
There'll be time to come around again. Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. So I've got some reservations and concerns. I think this is a difficult trade-off for me. I definitely am supporting housing inspectors. I think that we need more. So I like that feature of this. I'm concerned about where the funding source is coming from. I may support this, but then also be interested in looking at how maybe we can fill some of those holes. I think the ongoing funding for the collaborative safety strategies made a lot of sense. I supported that, and I think what we heard at the public hearing is that some of the initiatives that had been started in the communities, particularly at Little Earth, really needed some ongoing support to get results and bear fruit later. And this was a place where they could potentially have gotten that ongoing support. I'm speaking particularly to the concerns about heroin addiction and heroin use that was going on in South Minneapolis. So this puts often in these budget choices difficult decisions. I think I want to support this because I also am supportive, and I've heard that people asking for more housing inspections, especially in some of the multifamily dwelling units, and we have to do more. So support this, but I would like us to think about, are there other ways that we can maybe come back and look at get some funding before the budget is over to support some of those ongoing initiatives that came out of those collaboratives, maybe before the final budget is approved.
Thank you. Councilmember Glidden.
Thanks. Boy, we've had a lot of comments on this, which I think just goes to show a lot of people are very concerned about the housing work and entering into it from different perspectives, from stories that they're hearing from people. I will say I agree with Councilmember Gordon. These are difficult choices, and but I support this motion. And I also want to make the point that even though it's a different way to go at safety issues, this is also about safety. This is about safety, and it's about health. It's making sure people have safe spaces to live. The other thing I'll just say is that having that good foundation of inspectors, a better foundation that is better able to communicate with property owners and residents and build those relationships also is a balance to other work that I know that we are trying to add staff to help support. We have this housing, I forget the exact title, but the housing protection staff that is also being added. And I just say this because one of the biggest things that I have been hearing from individuals and organizations I've been communicating with is about retaliation for making complaints or using threat of retaliation to tenants for making complaints about inspections. I've also heard this very specifically from people who are in immigrant and refugee communities about how their lives are being threatened with if they speak up about the need for safe spaces in their housing. So this is a very real issue. This is kind of part of addressing that issue, and I just don't want that point to be lost, that this is also about safety in the myriad of ways we need to be thinking about safety for our residents.
Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just wanted to note for Councilmember Gordon that although this does use the ongoing funds that were part of the community safety strategies, we backfilled the funds for Little Earth and Broadway as one-time dollars in the first motion. So the amount of money is the same. It has shifted, however, from ongoing to one time. And I could speak to that just briefly. I think, if the program continues to be successful, I would certainly be open to an ongoing program in the future because we were balancing so many different things and trying to find this matching fund now, which had to be ongoing funds. It constrained a bit some of the other ongoing fund options. And we are also moving it from the mayor's office into NCR for the first time. So in a sense, it's really being redesigned for the first time as a new program administered in a different way. So it felt comfortable to me, and I think others, to have it in the one-time fund this year, with, at least speaking for myself, very open to making it an ongoing program in the future as we see the results that are coming out from this newly designed program housed in NCR instead of in the mayor's office.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councilmember Bender. I also want to point out that it's important to have the inspectors be ongoing funding. It's going to take time to onboard folks, get some very high-quality training, probably both in language and cultural issues, and then get them out on the streets. That could take half the year. And so I'm worried that we spend a lot of money to train people to do this job, and then it's one-time funding, and we have the same problem. So, and I was advised about that by Councilmember Bender as well. So I just want to note to Councilmember Gordon, that's why this received the ongoing funding, not one time.
Councilmember Gordon.
I appreciate the comments. I did take some comfort in seeing the 50,000 there for Little Earth and one-time funding. And I'll keep that in mind as I consider options moving forward for amendments.
Thank you. Additional comments on item number 4? Not seeing any. All those in favor of the Councilmember Goodman's item number 4, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item carries. We're now to item number 5, which is Councilmember Palmisano's amendment related to body camera data specialists. Councilmember Palmisano, could you introduce that for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I bring forward this motion as a follow-up to something that we did as a council. I'm failing to remember the exact date, but a couple months ago, to suggest as a result of the body camera audit that we start the process of hiring body camera analysts. This is in conversation with Chief Arredondo in terms of feeling as though these positions are absolutely integral to a working body camera program. In the difficult challenge of where to find money in the budget and move things around, in conversation with colleagues, it was suggested to take them from this appropriation already in the police budget. So I'm happy to answer questions, but that's just the brief of it.
Thank you for that. Any questions for Councilmember Palmisano on item number 5? Not seeing any, please signify by saying aye in favor. Aye. That was awkward. I apologize. But I think it passed. Moving to amendment number 6. This is by Councilmember Gordon and Councilmember Andrew Johnson. Councilmember Gordon, could you introduce that item?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is an amendment to support ongoing support for senior services. The Neighborhood Community Relations Department was actually recommending $60,000 for this item in the mayor's proposal. She only funded it up to $20,000. And also in the Neighborhood Community Relations Department, they hadn't requested money for the collaborative safety strategies, but they received $475,000. So This amendment was intended to move a small portion of that $475,000 from the collaborative safety strategies to senior support services so that we could do more with that. I think we heard a lot about that at the public hearing. I think the growing population of seniors in the city is something for us to think about, and these programs actually allow seniors to stay in their homes longer and in the neighborhoods and in the communities and do an enormous amount of work for us.
Thank you. Councilmember Andrew Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to thank you in particular as well for your help with this. I know it's an important program to you, and I wanted to recognize and acknowledge that and thank all of the individuals that came out the other night to talk about this very important work that's being done that helps countless seniors across our community.
Thank you very much for that comment. I appreciate the work, as it does help us continue our Minneapolis for a Lifetime initiative by supporting that work. So we appreciate the comments from council members and the work on the staff, as well as the public who came and joined us at the public hearing that really made that a reality. So thank you for that. Any additional questions on item amendment number 6? Not seeing any. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item carries. Thank you. Councilmember Palmisano, you have amendment labeled number 7. If you could introduce council amendment number 7.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. This item is one that we've been working with the City Attorney's Office and Councilmember Glidden to find some one-time money for housing that the Link purchased. And it currently is in operation, and it houses victims, youth victims. It was a little bit of, it was an RFP process, and there was confusion earlier over to whether this was a one-time appropriation or a multi-year appropriation. So this amount of money keeps this new housing open and serving people, and gives 1 year for the Link to find other kinds of funding.
Thanks very much. Council Vice President Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to thank Councilmember Palmisano for helping find a solution here, and we had been in conversation about this being important. I will just say we've also heard from city staff just about the importance of kind of allowing this work to continue and give them this time, especially noting kind of all the big significant events happening this year. So I'm very supportive and thank her for putting this together.
Any other further comments, questions on item amendment number 7? Not seeing any. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item carries. Thank you very much. Item number 8, Council Vice President Glidden.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment is addressing resources needed in the Labor Standards Enforcement Division, which is housed in Civil Rights. This was a new division that was established when we first passed a significant ordinance, which was the applying citywide, which was the Safe and Sick Time Ordinance. Since the time that, and I know a budget kind of is a very long development process, but kind of in that timeline as the budget was kind of getting developed and finalized, we also passed another significant ordinance, which is the minimum wage, municipal minimum wage ordinance, which will start to be implemented in January of 2018. So I just want to note. This is an amendment that accomplishes 2 things. What the department had in the budget as far as new resources was $60,000 in ongoing funding, and yet they also were identified as being approved for another full-time position, even though $60,000 would not fund a full-time position. So adding $40,000 in ongoing funds to that will allow the hiring of a new full-time position that the department can get underway with right away. I think that's going to be critical to their ability to do the work, which is, that we have supported unanimously, or almost unanimously, excuse me, I'm sorry about that, to implement a municipal minimum wage ordinance. This is work that is both about enforcement, but primarily right now about education and setting that foundation. The second part of the amendment would ensure that there is some funds for community contracts, which are there to supplement the work of the department as it directs, but essentially, again, it's about amplifying their work around education and whatever else that they would want to direct with those service contracts. And I know that they started that work this past year. So I would go ahead and move both of these items and ask for your support.
Thank you very much. Any comments, questions on amendment number 8? Not seeing any. All those in favor of item number 8, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item carries. Thank you very much. Council Vice President, you also have item number 9.
Thank you. This item does not actually shift any funds in the budget, but it is more of a signal of a conversation we've been having with community planning and economic development about designating funds within budget. The department has been doing significant work with the Mapping Prejudice Project, which is spearheaded by professor and staff through Augsburg College. And it is work that also is critical to the city's ability to do its own work, specifically in long-range planning, which has already been doing significant partnership work with the Mapping Prejudice Project, but also within our housing division. So in conversations with Mr. Frank, we have talked about designating it's an up to amount. So the department is right now in conversations with Mapping Prejudice, again, about how it might utilize some contracts that enhance the ability of the city to do its work through the support of the information being put together by the Mapping Prejudice Project. So that's that.
Good. Thank you very much. Any questions on amendment number 9? Not seeing any. All those in favor of the staff direction with the spend up to $100,000 within existing resources, amendment number 9, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item carries. Thank you very much. Item number 10 is an amendment by Council President Johnson. It wasn't, I apologize, in the original stapled packet, but it's been passed out separately. Council President, if you could join us and introduce item number 10.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is amending the mayor's budget for $103,000 of fund balance fund. And this fund balance is coming from an original appropriation called Rebuild Our Communities, and it actually was dollars that were allocated or were potentially allocated to neighborhood associations to deal with tornado outcomes, tornado challenges that resulted. And of course, the tornado was a number of years ago. So we have moved on beyond that, are doing great work. But this is essentially taking those dollars that are unspent dollars and moving them to CPED for a contract with Summit Academy. OIC has developed a culinary arts initiative, is developing a culinary arts initiative. And that will complement the work that they are doing, which we were some of the original funders of, in the ability to take people who lack a GED and get them their GED while they are going through either their healthcare program or the construction program. This adds a culinary arts program to the kind of training that people can receive through this program, and again, in conjunction with getting their GED. This has been a very successful program. We were some of the first money in, particularly in the GED program, and actually they've been able to garner much financial private support to the tune of several $million to train people in these areas where there is a very much a need for employees to go right into these professions. And it's a great tool to address some of our unemployment disparities. So I'm going to move this. It's again unspent dollars from an existing fund.
Thank you very much. Any comments or questions for item amendment number 10? Not seeing any. All those in favor of item number 10, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? That item carries. I believe that concludes the...
Mr. Chair?
Yeah, I'll get... Oh, yeah, we'll get to that in 1 second. That concludes the packet of the prepared 10 amendments that were brought forward as part of the package. It's now appropriate for additional comments, amendments to be brought forward by members. And the first that I have in queue is Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm bringing forward an amendment with Councilmember Gordon that would, on a one-time basis, increase the appropriation to fund a temporary lead inspector. It's my understanding that this is an existing position, and if not funded, we'll lose our existing staffer who's doing this work and frankly is helping out dozens of children who suffer from lead poisoning across our city. I understand Councilmember Frey has an amendment to this to change the source, as I've identified the source as greater MSP for that funding. So I'm not going to speak any further on it. I'll let Councilmember Frey make his motion to change the source of the funding.
Mr. Chair, I
Yes,
don't have a
Councilmember Glidden.
copy of this, so
We're just,
does the clerk have these,
The
or?
staff should have passed those out, or I believe.
Clerk
they
is
Right.
passing
have
out
passed
those right now.
Yes.
Okay.
let's just wait just a moment as we can make sure everybody has the language in front of everybody. So what will be coming forward is the Councilmember Andrew Johnson, Councilmember Gordon's motion, and that has greater MSP as a source. And then we'll be recognizing Councilmember Frey for an amendment. Is that correct? Just want to
Thank you,
make sure the
Mr. Chair.
paper.
Yes, there is an amendment. The amendment, which should be being passed out
Okay,
right now,
so the amended version is being passed out. Want to
would
make sure everybody-
accomplish the goal of hiring the lead inspectors, but wouldn't take
No.
it out of greater MSP. I'm going to wait for you guys to get the amendment.
Let's wait for paper to get out here in front of us. If
Yeah.
I could ask you to just pause for a moment,
That's fine.
Councilmember Frey. So procedurally, what I'd like to make sure is that what we're looking at right now is a proposed amendment for Councilmember Johnson Gordon on, for the lead inspector. And we're looking at a piece of, or the document is amendment that we're going to be taking up is Councilmember Frey, which has two items on it labeled A and B. If everybody has that in front of them, I'll recognize Councilmember Frey if you could help clarify that for us now that the paper's in front of us.
Of course. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this ensures that we can have the money for the additional lead inspector, but it does not take the money from greater MSP. And I do think it is important that we have an ongoing relationship with greater MSP and our regional economy at large. Mayor Hodges had this item in her budget for, I believe, in a very important reason. And I believe that as we transition to the next administration, it's important that we're thinking regionally as well. So I'm very supportive of the overarching mission of greater MSP, and this provides an alternate funding source which would reduce the ongoing, keyword ongoing appropriation in city attorney for the pre-filing charge review team program from 200 to 100, and increasing the appropriation to the health by 100. Here's the important fact. The city attorney's pre-filing charge review team will actually not be diminished. All it does is transition the money from 100,000 of the money from ongoing to one time, and you can see that in letter B, amending the 2018 mayor's recommended budget of elections and city attorney on a one-time basis, reducing the one-time appropriation elections for the 2018 election from $1 million to $950,000, and increasing the appropriation, this is the key part, increasing the appropriation to the city attorney on a one-time basis from $25,000 to $75,000 for the pre-charge review, pre-charge diversion programs. So I think this ultimately accomplishes the goal. In terms of elections, oftentimes the money is paid after the fact, depending on how much is needed. And that would likely be the case once again following the 2018 gubernatorial elections. Happy to answer any questions on the topic.
All right, questions, comments on the Frey amendment? Council Vice President Glidden. Oh, I'm sorry. Councilmember Gordon, do you have a priority motion?
Well, basically, I'm wondering if the amendment was moved, so it's before us, and now it's being, so we had the Johnson-Gordon amendment that I think was moved, and now I think we're amending that. So I just,
That's correct.
That is correct.
My fault.
so I want to, well, I know, it's not really your fault. Our speaker, I just want to have the opportunity to vote separately on this and then know that we have the other amendment before us, should this amendment to it fail, if that makes any sense.
Yeah,
I don't know if
procedurally, Councilmember, we're going to be taking up the Frey amendment and then would return to the underlying motion of Johnson-Gordon amendment. I have additional priority motions in front of us.
Point of inquiry.
It's an inquiry, okay?
Yeah, I think where the confusion is coming in is if that was a substitute, a motion to substitute out the language, and then if we would have a separate column, I think that's where I'm running into confusion, is the column to speak to Frey's amendment of the amendment.
Mr. Clerk, can you help
Mr.
us?
Chair, just for clarification purposes, if the intent of the motion from Councilmember Frey, paragraph A, is to replace and substitute in whole the motion offered as an amendment by Andrew Johnson and Gordon, procedurally, if that is what's intended, it would be better for the Johnson-Gordon amendment to be withdrawn and take up action on Frey, so it's very clear on what the sources of funds are and what's being proposed to be done. Otherwise, the action you're taking is to take up two motions offered by Frey, one of which procedurally would substitute the motion offered by Johnson and Gordon. And when we return to vote on Johnson and Gordon as a substitute, it would be the Frey motion to begin with anyways. So if the clarification is that the Frey motion replaces the funding proposed related to the piece here by Johnson and Gordon in whole, then I would suggest that you remove or withdraw the Johnson-Gordon amendment and proceed to Frey's.
To the author, Councilmember Johnson.
Hang on.
Mr. Chair, my preference would be to vote on the substitute because I am interested in the original source, but I imagine that the group will be supportive of the substitute by Frey.
I didn't quite hear what he said. Can you guys hang on a second? I didn't quite hear what you said, Councilmember Johnson.
He doesn't withdraw his motion right now.
Does not.
That's correct.
Okay, then I'll move to amend.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Johnson, I still have, okay, thank you. So we're on a Frey amendment, and we're looking to Council Vice President Glidden was first in queue on the other line, if I'm going to switch that over. Council Vice President Glidden.
Right, thanks. And I can speak anytime. I just whatever.
No, we'll move that.
Okay. All right. I'm all confused, but all right. Listen, I know it's always hard. These funding sources, they're hard, right? And then there's just a lot of important work people want to do. And I will say on the lead work, I was on that lead task force for many years. The lead work is really important, and part of what's happening right now is nationally, you used to be able to get significant grants to do this work. We have been very successful because we have amazing staff who do use those funding sources well, who have been very successful, and just those opportunities are not as prevalent right now, and so this is kind of like the atmosphere. So anyway, I know all this stuff is difficult. I will say, just because we're talking about the Frey amendment, I do not support taking the funding source, this new idea, of reducing the pre-filing charge review team program from $200,000 to $100,000. And essentially what that means, I believe, and we don't always have staff here to answer questions, but Mr. Nelson is here. I'm assuming that he is familiar with the program and knows what this budget item would be. But, if you having ongoing funding means that you kind of staff up and to do a certain amount of work. And if you don't have that and you have little bits of one time, you go about the work very differently. And so that's just the fact of it. I will tell you, I think this is the most significant criminal justice reform work that the city is doing, is putting resources into how to review charges prior to filing the charge. So what this does is it allows the police professionals to continue to do their jobs, but then it puts professionals in the city attorney's division in the position of reviewing those documents and reviewing the evidence before a charge is filed. And of course, once a charge is filed, then you got a bunch of process after that. But in today's world, even having that charge on your record follows you forever. It follows you forever. So for us to, and so you file a charge, often charges are dropped, or they identify they didn't really meet the elements of the crime, or whatever are the things that come about. There's so many things that can come about that kind of say, you know what, they filed the charge, but really this is not the kind of case we want to pursue, for whatever reason. And that's not saying anything bad about the police officer in the first place. It's that that person is doing their professional job, but then we need a better eyes to review. This is important work. This is about changing existing ways of doing business so we better serve the public. And it's not about stepping away from public safety, but it's making sure when we are filing charges, we feel confident this is the right thing to do. So anyway, I'm very concerned about using this as a source. And again, we got time. We got like the whole day, which I will say, probably nobody wants to say the whole day, but we have the whole day. We can take time. We can look for, is there another source that fits? Others may support this source, but I'll just let you know, I don't.
I see Councilmember Frey recognizing for a priority motion.
That was to clarify, if Mr. Chair, if it's all right, if I can speak real quick ahead so we don't go down the wrong path here. So the intention was not to reduce the amount of money that is for the pre-filing charge review. So on this, it reduces it by $100,000, but then it increases it by $50,000 in the following paragraph on B. What it should have done is increased it by $100,000 so that there is no change. So in other words, it would bring the 2018 gubernatorial election from $1 million to $900,000 instead of $950,000, reallocating it to $100,000.
So if I could just have Mr. Intermill clarify, I mean, and I understand that you're correcting what might be some of the language in here, but what I'm still hearing is that we had $200,000 in ongoing funding, and we would replace that for this, the pre-charge review team, with $100,000 in ongoing and $100,000 in one time.
That is correct.
So and I am saying, so if that's correct, again, then I think kind of the comments I was making are still out there, which is that it's a very different program you design when you have one-time funds, as opposed to what you do when you have ongoing funds, which is about whether you are confident enough to hire staff, how you go about creating a permanency to a program and the scope of the program.
Mr. Intermill, if you could help outline that.
Mr. Chair, Council Vice President, and others, to the staffing question in particular, I did want to raise the issue that in the mayor's proposed budget, the $200,000 is for 2 FTE ongoing. And so in replacing $100,000 of ongoing funds with $100,000 of one-time funds, I would strongly recommend we also reduce 1 FTE so that there's not so that we're not out of structural balance.
Structural balance is kind of key. Does that require an amendment to that amendment?
I believe it would, Mr. Chair.
Before we procedurally vote on this session, further conversation.
So as Councilmember Glidden properly pointed out, the lead inspectors have been funded on a one-time basis for the last 3 years. So it's not like we can't have FTEs that are funded on a one-time basis. You just need to continuously re-up. If that's not the case, I'm happy to change. So what is the structural change that you're looking for to make it sound?
So, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Frey, the lead inspectors issue, there is an FTE in the health department's complement that they can use, and that's why we don't need to add an FTE when we're adding those ongoing funds. It's the city attorney's department when we're adding 2 full FTE to their complement. When we go to set the base for the next year under the current service level, if we were to leave these 2 FTE in, then though the one-time funding source would go away, we would be adding and picking that up in their base. And so that's where the structural balance comes in, is on the books right now. On the books following the amendment, we would be showing that there would not be that additional funding coming in because it's a one-time item, but in reality, that one-time funding would pick up. And so that's where we would be out of that structural balance. It's in the weeds.
Can you say that last part one more time just so I understand it?
So in the way that we compile our budget and off of our current service level through the financial policies is that when we go to set each department's target, we look at the number of FTE in their complement. And so based on that, we apply assumptions around how much each FTE will cost. And so that is paid for by subtracting the previous year's salaries. And so if we were to put one-time salaries in, or one-time monies in, and without accounting for that ongoing, we would run out of structural balance.
I understand. That's actually a good point, Mr. Chair. I'm going to withdraw.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to withdraw the amendment.
The Frey amendment has been withdrawn then, which allows us to go back to, if I'm correct on the priority motions, everybody's out of that? I see Councilmember Glidden still had something. Oh, that's fine. I see Councilmember Cano has asked for a priority motion.
Chairman Quincy, I just have a question. So CM Frey, are you removing both A and B or just A?
I'm removing the whole thing.
Both things? Okay, I'm really interested in B, so I would like to talk to you about that at some point. The pre-charge diversion program to address commercial sexual exploitation. So just wanted to let you know. I could have texted you, but.
Yeah, okay.
All right, well, it's not a priority motion in front of us. That's a good question. But the Councilmember Frey is withdrawing his entire amendment, as I understand it.
Yes.
Correct? So we return to the Councilmember Johnson's conversation. He's showing up on our speaker management as last in queue on the original amendment. The Frey amendment column is empty. Councilmember Johnson.
Mr. Chair, just to clarify, I see that Councilmember Glidden is ahead of me in the queue. Are you?
That was for the others.
Okay. Certainly, and I just would speak to this motion. I know that a number of my colleagues support the greater MSP funding, and I respect where they're coming from on that. I understand that the organization does do valuable work for the city of Minneapolis. I also want to acknowledge that after co-authoring cuts last year with a colleague on this, I multiple times publicly stated, hey, greater MSP, please reach out and explain what value you're providing for this. And I haven't heard anything from them yet. They've had an entire year of opportunities to do that. And meanwhile, after those cuts, I've received a number of emails from individuals who've worked specifically with greater MSP, raising concerns around how they use their money. And I want to be able to address those concerns with greater MSP and have a sit down with them. So here's another opportunity. I'm saying it again publicly, and as I have been saying it for a year, please, greater MSP, sit down with me and explain what this money is used for and what value we're getting from it. And I have other serious concerns with the organization. I'm glad that we were able to provide for our needs on a contractual basis as a city. I look forward to finding out more of how this funding is used and what value is provided by it. But in the meantime, I tap this as a source because we've got this really important work going on. We've got dozens of kids that are suffering from lead poisoning. This will allow us to continue that work and will prevent an existing employee doing excellent work in the city of Minneapolis from having to be let go because of funding. So I would ask my colleagues to support this, and then I'm happy to work with any of my colleagues that want to find funding for Greater MSP. We can look at other sources, and Greater MSP still has an opportunity yet before we finally pass this budget to reach out and explain to us the value for that money that we're providing.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was the co-author of the effort last year to strike money from Greater MSP because I felt that they weren't doing anything to benefit the city's economic development efforts. And in the year that they've had to show us what they were doing in order to advance regional economic development, I feel that they've made their case. We have a 1.5 plus or minus $1 billion budget in the city. We are a partner with a lot of other cities and counties around the state. Whether you agreed or not, they coordinated all of the efforts surrounding the Amazon bid. They coordinated all of the efforts surrounding the publicity surrounding the Amazon bid, which in and of itself probably bought us millions of dollars of free publicity for our state and for our region. I am no fan of corporate welfare. I have a long track record on these issues, but I believe they have followed through. Councilmember Frey and others could speak to the innovative workforce development work they're doing, which is also consistent with the workforce development work we're doing to recruit younger millennials into our workforce at the city, and they're doing that around the region. In addition to that, they're assisting with marketing the Upper Harbor Terminal, which we are currently working towards redeveloping and have indicated an interest in working with us on the Kmart at Lake Street project. They have added value more than what the $10,000 we gave them last year, and I don't believe at this time we need to take another pound of flesh out of them. If we want to have a conversation about eliminating our partnership with Greater MSP, then let's do that from a policy point of view rather than a budget point of view. I do not think this is the right way to do this, and attempting to compare economic development to lead in children is somewhat bothersome to me. Of course, lead in children is a major issue and doesn't compare to the work that Greater MSP is doing, but I understand when trying to eliminate Greater MSP, anything could be chosen that might sound more important. I'd urge folks to vote no on this.
Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I supported the funding cut that we did last year, but again, last night, Greater MSP hosted and led a panel about housing potential on the Upper Harbor. They have been a better partner, I will say. I think we got their attention, and I think it's really important that we continue to be a part of the economic success, not just of our city, but we're key to the economic success of our region, and that's Greater MSP's job. We're a part of a huge economic picture, and we need to be a player in that arena and not be perceived as trying to pull the efforts of cooperation to market our region down. The Amazon bid is just exactly one example also of their value in, again, raising the profile of this community, raising the profile of the educated, wonderful workforce that we have, and moving forward as a region that has its challenges. I mean, we're the northernmost region in the United States of America. This is not a place that comes to people's minds when they're talking about major innovations. So I think I'm satisfied that we got their attention, that they're assisting us in some of the highest potential developments that we have right now with the Upper Harbor, with Lake Street, and I think their expertise is of value to us.
Thank you. Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was looking as others were talking, but and I knew you were working on this, Councilmember Johnson. I just didn't get a chance to follow up with health. I just wondered, I would like more information about the need related to health inspection for lead. I know initially when the guidelines were changed, there was kind of a bigger backlog of kids who were meeting the threshold with the newer threshold when it went down from 10 to 5. And I remember the presentations about that in committee, but I just wondered if there is available now more information about the volume of inspections that are needed and the backlog. And then I also, Councilmember Glidden reminded me that I think part of the settlement from Northern Metals was related to lead inspection. So I completely agree that this should be a priority for our health department and for our city, but just wanting a little more information about the details of the need and how our staffing levels are now.
All right. I'll take that as a form of a question for Councilmember Bender to Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did ask Gretchen Musicant, our Public Health Commissioner, about that, and she said for this funding, they'd be able to handle an additional 20 to 40 cases of lead poisoning and mitigating that.
It might be appropriate to have additional staff come and talk to that item, but if they can get down, that's fine. Councilmember Cano.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be voting in favor of this amendment today, and I just wanted to explain a little bit about why. I have also never been approached by representatives of greater MSP to provide more in-depth understanding about the interface of the work that we on the council do and the budgeting resources we send them in connection to, for example, the racial equity work that I am hoping that they're tackling through a variety of their initiatives, but specifically in Ward 9, you know, a lot of the work that we fund as an enterprise should really be able to articulate a citywide impact and approach, and that's the work that I've been leading on Meet Minneapolis as well. A lot of the work that we do there in our committee always tries to uplift our cultural corridors such as West Broadway, East Franklin, East Lake Street, Cedar Riverside. So for me, it's really important to better understand where greater MSP is coming from, and this is an invitation to them and the representatives to reach out to our offices and let us know more about what this work entails. On the other hand, the health department did do a good job of going around and briefing council members about their needs. The lead issue is a very important issue for the racially concentrated areas of poverty in our city, which Phillips and Ventura Village and many of those neighborhoods are a part of. Many of the houses in neighborhoods like mine, where we have a lot of low-income community members and high cultural diversity, tend to live in homes that are very dilapidated, filled with lead, with small children. Phillips is one of the areas that has the highest number of small children in the city. So this is really a life and death issue for some of our community members because of the exposure, the high level of exposure of lead in our families' lives, and so you'd be shocked at the level of the poor housing quality that we find in some of those neighborhoods that are embedded in the racially concentrated areas of poverty in our city, of which I represent. And so I'm happy to support this, and I thank Council Members Gordon and Andrew Johnson for taking this on and for letting me know about it.
Councilmember Gordon.
Well, I'm supporting this too. I think that the concentrations of lead in certain parts of our city are still an enormous problem. The backlog that we're trying to get to is also a problem. For a long time, we set the risk level so a lot higher, and we realized that lead poisoning in our children is more serious even if they're at lower levels. And so when the state, with us asking them to do so, adjusted those down so that we could address some of those problems. And lead poisoning impacts school performance, it impacts later behaviors. The preponderance of lead in the environment has been tied to increases in crime and violence. This is a very serious problem in our city, and it happens to be a problem that impacts people living closest to freeways, and in some parts of our city with the older housing stock more than others. I think we've made some great inroads in our efforts, but it's still a problem that we have to deal with and we have to address. With this move of funds, we're still more than doubling what we're contributing to Greater MSP. Greater MSP, I think, has a very large budget. We can be a partner with them. If we pass this now, we also still will have several days to look for other funding so we could backfill greater MSP if somebody wants to come forward and make that amendment. But I think it's important that we put our priority on the most vulnerable and needy residents of our city, and we don't end up cutting staff that we need right now just to keep up with the problems of lead poisoning in the city. So I'm willing to look at and consider funding MSP more than 25,000, which again is doubling, more than doubling what we gave them last year, if that's what my colleagues want to do. But I think the priority should be solving this problem right now in this way and making sure we get ongoing funds in the future.
Councilmember Frey.
First, a couple of clarifications. Councilmember Johnson's amendment does not, or the voting against this is not a cut to staff. Councilmember Johnson's amendment is an increase to the number of staff devoted to lead, and it's an amendment that, for the purposes of lead, I think everybody is for, and I would very much like to find a funding source. I don't think that the funding source should come from greater MSP. Minneapolis is the largest city in the region. We should be a participant in the regional economy. And by the way, economic justice is an important racial equity issue as well. And this is an issue that they are focusing on full-heartedly, as we know that we're hemorrhaging people of color from our economy right now. In fact, those that come from other states and other areas, even those that are from here, leave at huge margins. So if we are really talking about the necessity of retaining people of color in our economy and making sure that there's adequate progress, this is something that we need to be considering, not just for purposes of Minneapolis, but for a regional economy as a whole. And it sends a pretty significant message that if for the second year in a row we're saying we're not going to participate in the regional economy. Mayor Hodges believes that this item should be in the budget. I do also believe that this item should be in the budget as well. Last year, Councilmember Gordon just said that we are doubling by moving it to 25,000. We are doubling the amount of money we spent last year, but he negated to mention that we first cut the amount by over $100,000. I think this is an important issue. I guess my ask to Councilmember Andrew Johnson is rather than moving this amendment now, if you would be willing to work with us over the next week, whatever it is, to find a funding source, because we really do want to find one.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify that when I talked to the health commissioner, my understanding was that this was an existing staffer that was working on these cases. And under the mayor's proposed budget, the funding will no longer be there to pay for that staff member. And so that this motion would allow the existing staff member to continue their work on this. To my colleague's point around sending a significant message, if this cut is in place a second year in a row to greater MSP, I would say the significant message to greater MSP is come on down to City Hall and talk with council members about what service you provide. We're not going to lose our partnership with them. We continue to work with them on issues on a pay-as-you-go basis and contract out when we have a need. And this is an organization meant to sell Minneapolis, and they're not, in my opinion, doing a great job selling themselves. So I have a little bit of concern over the job that they're doing on behalf of us. And I know we've got a lot of big things that have been in the news, Amazon, the Super Bowl, X Games. There's a lot of hype around that stuff. But I would say, look, to my colleagues' points, we are a strong city in a strong region. We have these natural assets in place, and that's what's selling Minneapolis, is the assets, the people, all of that. And we have a department, CPED, that has extremely talented staff that is already collaborating intergovernmentally with other organizations. And I think here we have an opportunity. Again, greater MSP, I know they provide value. I'm not saying that they shouldn't exist as an organization. I do think they have more work to do. And the message we would be sending here is come on down. Let's have you work more in partnership with us and explain more the value you provide. But at the end of the day, what we would be funding with this is really, really important work that's going on. And I hope that we vote in favor of this today, provide the funding so the important lead work can continue, and then, again, Greater MSP has a week to come on down and explain the value.
Councilmember Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, I'm going to make a couple suggestions, and people can take them or not, but I will say it is not uncommon that, we hear information and it sounds like Councilmember Frey is very willing to work on, is there other acceptable spending sources? And there may not be, but it is not uncommon for when we take our lunch break or whatever that is. It looks like we only have a couple more motions to consider, but, that we take our break for lunch, and you two can have some additional conversation, see if there is another source, and there may not be, again, that could be presented. We have, and then come back and do that after the lunch hour. I also see that Ms. Musicant is here, Mr. Hanlon's here, so for people who had more like a factual question, if the chair desires, sounds like we could have one of those two certainly come up and kind of reaffirm or amplify whatever that Councilmember Johnson has described about kind of what's the situation today, sort of a thing. So I just say that because at least Councilmember Bender, maybe somebody else had some more factual type questions that might be helpful just to get a little feedback on, and then give a little time. But it's up to you, Councilmember Johnson. So.
I have Councilmember Gordon in queue next. I'm going to recognize Councilmember Gordon and hope he's going to ask a question of staff.
Yes, thank you very much. I did notice that staff's here now. I think that Councilmember Bender asked some questions, and we were here, so I'd appreciate the opportunity to hear from the Health Commissioner about this position and what it is providing now and could in the future.
Commissioner Musicant, if you could help elaborate. I do see that the motion, the language, I do want to point out, it says it's on a one-time basis and it's for a temporary lead inspector. So if that's correct in language, if you could answer those questions, would be very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I did hear Councilmember Bender's question, and it had been our assumption as well that when we lowered the threshold at which we were intervening, that there would be a bump in the caseload and then we could catch up, which is why we've had 3 years of one-time funding. It's not playing out that way. It's a new level of cases that we need the staff person in order to respond to. And the Northern Metals settlement is related to lead and asthma, but it's not going to fund a position. It's actually going to create more cases, help us identify more cases and create more work that we need to respond to.
Does that answer your Councilmember?
Thank you, Director. I appreciate that very much.
Thank you.
And just to be clear, we currently have a staff person who's doing this work.
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Gordon, yes, we currently have someone filling this position who's had the one-time position for 3 years.
And so this cut would result in us losing a inspector.
That is correct.
Mr. Intermal, is there anything you wanted to add as clarification for budget structure for anything? Or Mr. Ruff, if you could join us.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I think there are cases, and the Health Commissioner just pointed out, where there are bumps in use, and there might be temporary use of FTEs, but it's always with the understanding that at a point in time, there would be an evaluation as to whether that should be long-term. So, for example, we've had more traffic control agents downtown because of the increased construction, and that department has come in presentations to say, this is the last year, and if we find it's still sustained, then we need to go to full-time ongoing funding. And I think the same is the case here, as I just heard the commissioner say that one-time funding going forward is not adequate. And so based on the financial policies that you've adopted, both previously and affirmed this morning already, we would need to have ongoing funding for that kind of program. Just on the comments that Council Vice President Glidden made earlier, which is it changes the way a department plans for the future. So I would just encourage that as we go through these evaluations, whether it be in the next hour or the next few days, that we do look for ongoing funding for this position based on the comments from the commissioner.
Councilmember Frey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, I agree with Vice President Glidden. If we could have just a little bit of time during perhaps the lunch break, that would be an excellent opportunity to not just find the funding, but as Mr. Ruff stated, find funding that is ongoing. I mean, this is an opportunity to allow the health department to plan for the future and not just propose a Band-Aid solution for 1 year. So I would just respectfully request that we just be given some additional time to find a source that functions not just to keep greater MSP money in place and keep Minneapolis as part of the regional economy, but also allows for our health department to plan for the future.
Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to move to postpone this till after lunch. And I just would ask Mr. Ruff or Mr. Mike Intermill, excuse me, how many vacant positions do we have in the city right now? Anybody know that off the top of their heads? Pardon me? 61? Okay, I think we can find a position. So give us till after lunch. And
I'm going to take that as a motion to table, if I could do that, which is not a debatable motion. So all those in favor of tabling this item until after lunch break, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item carries. Are there additional amendments being offered at this and during this session? I'm sorry, Councilmember Yang. If you could clear that column, if you could. Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would ask to go after Councilmember Reich. He actually has a motion as well.
All right. Councilmember Reich, do you have a motion?
Yes, I do, Mr. Chair. The motion before you is to accommodate the efforts for our CTAP program. It just rounds up their dollars so they can have a full complement of their projected planning and initiatives to 100,000. It's 35,000. We worked with staff to identify it, and that rounds it up.
Thank you very much. Council President Johnson. Oh, it's my fault. Any questions on Councilmember Reich's motion? Council Vice President.
This is more just a question, if anybody knows the answer. And I like the CTAP program. I can support this. This is not about me not supporting the motion, but I'm actually surprised to see that there is uncommitted Great Streets program dollars. And so that says to me, I thought usually those things were like oversubscribed, or they used to be, and I haven't been watching it so carefully in recent years. And it kind of says to me, is there something not going right with the design of the program or how people are able to fit applications on whatever short-time turnaround there is? I mean, there's something that is not quite working there if we've got dollars that are unspent. So maybe someone can just eliminate that for me, and I do support this.
Mr. Intermill, from a budget perspective?
Mr. Chair, Council Vice President, my understanding in talking with both finance staff and the department is that these dollars are programmed, they're just not financially committed. And that using them, financially committing them in this way wouldn't jeopardize other programming.
So say that again in like real person speak, like what's going.
Uh-oh, we want a real person, so maybe Mr. Frank. Not that you're not a real person, Mr. Intermill, Mr. Frank.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, David Frank from CPED, and that was a great moment of levity. Thank you. To the question, Council Vice President, we have programmed and have put out requests for proposals and will be spending these dollars. It's just that when you look in the financial system today, we haven't yet signed a contract, right? So they're not officially encumbered in the finance sense of the word. So that's what that uncommitted financial phrase means.
Then isn't this like double spending if we think that we will get committed? Anyway, that's what I'm not tracking with what he said with Mr. Intermill's description, and just trying to understand what's going on. And are there dollars available that wouldn't otherwise be committed and used?
Mr. Chair, Council Vice President Glidden, these are dollars that we are working to spend that we have not yet signed a contract for, And this is a slight modification to the emphasis of how we will spend them, right? So we were going to spend them anyway. They will be
Okay.
spent. The question is, are they spent on CTAP functions? Are they spent on BTAP functions? This is definitely money we will spend, just a small change in the emphasis of how we will spend them.
And it's,
Does that answer your question?
35,000.
I think so. I'm just, and it's $2018 or 20, okay, so 28. Okay, so it's just really designating a portion of the program.
Correct.
I see. Okay, all right.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also kind of am confused because in committee, we certainly could say, okay, there's not enough money in the CTAP program. We can take it from another source. It doesn't really rise to the level of a budget amendment because it's taking money within CPED's budget and moving it from one thing to another, which could happen in committee. So perhaps Councilmember Wright could explain what's going on. If it was an increase in the CPED budget to fully fund, to put more money into the CTAP program, I'd be much more interested because I don't want to take money out of Great Street since we get twice the number of grants for the money that's available. So I'm just interested in Councilmember Reich's point of view.
Councilmember Reich, could you feel free to respond to Councilmember Goodman's question?
Certainly. Yeah, I was agnostic as to the source. I just asked the question, how do we have 100,000 projected activities to launch our newly formatted CTAP program? And there were dollars identified to the amount of $65,000. And I just explored where could we find another 35, and that's what staff found. So I'm quite agnostic as to the source. I just had an objective.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Reich, but I just heard staff say this isn't an increase to their budget, it's just moving things around the budget. So I think this should be an increase to the budget, not taking from one within the budget and putting it into another. Now I see Miles shaking his head, so now I'm not sure. Who knows, who can speak to this? I'm hearing like multiple different things.
I see Mr. Mercer making a move. I'm going to recognize Mr. Mercer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. My name is Miles Mercer. I'm with the Business Development Group at CPED, and my group administers the Great Streets program. So sounds like for many of you, when you think of the Great Streets program, you think of our business district support program or our facade improvement program. Those are not these dollars, is my understanding. Those are funded out of development account funds. My understanding, the dollars that are subject to Councilmember Reich's amendment are community block grant dollars, and those are related to the Great Streets program. So Great Streets has a couple different components to it. And the component that the CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant dollars are related to is our gap financing loans. So we don't necessarily have a gap financing loan that we are about to close on, and we can use that money that's there available for gap financing loans instead for CTAP activities, because we already use some of that CDBG allocation to help fund BTAP generally, the Business Technical Assistance Program.
Okay, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Reich, we don't need to do this here. This is something we can do in committee then, and we should change the language so it doesn't say Great Streets Program Project Budget, because that's exactly what it says. And so I read it literally that you're going to take money out of the Great Streets Program Project Budget, which is your language, not mine. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of energy for doing that. This is money that goes to businesses and neighborhoods and neighborhood associations to help, and there is great need on West Broadway and Franklin, and I just don't see us doing that. So I would ask that Councilmember Reich withdraw this so we either can find another source to add money to CPED, or we can handle this in committee to rearrange things in committee. One or the other is fine. I'm happy to add more money to CPED's budget.
Councilmember Reich?
Mr. Chair, given the debate we've just had, let's just lay this over like the last one and see if we can have further conversation over our break.
All right. We'll do that. I don't know. All those in favor of tabling till the next session, please signify by saying aye. Aye. That item is carried over as well. Are there additional that I'm missing? I see Councilmember Yang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will be bringing a revised version after the lunch break as well.
Okay, thank you. Are we seeing any additional amendments that you'd like to bring forward in this morning's session? Oh, Councilmember Gordon, I'm sorry.
You should have before you another amendment, which maybe we are prepared to pass before our lunch break. I know we might be getting hungry, but it's only 11:22.
Councilmember Gordon, I didn't understand what you said.
I said there should be a motion before you. It's actually a sheet with two different motions. One is a staff direction and one is a motion. It's by Gordon and A. Johnson. The motion is for 2 temporary health, food, and lodging inspectors. If you don't have it, I can make sure you get a copy. Everybody should have a copy. I'll just tell you what's on it and indicate to me if you need more copies. We have a bunch over here. Okay. This would amend the budget that would move money from the Community Planning Economic Development Department on a one-time basis to the Health Department. And it would decrease the one-time appropriation to CPED for their Management Information Network System from $1,719,000 down to $1,519,000, and increase the appropriation to the Health Department for food, lodging, and pools inspection on a one-time basis by $200,000. And this would be to provide 2 temporary health inspectors to meet industry demand. And I'll just speak to that for a moment, if I may.
Please.
So the Health Department originally requested 3 new inspectors. What we've seen is a big increase in the industry in recent years with the food trucks. We also have many community events where food is served, and they've been working hard to keep pace also with new small businesses that are coming up. We've actually seen some improvements in kind of helping with compliance and support and education. And without an increase in inspectors, they'd have to cut back on some of their programs and services. I believe most of the council offices have maybe heard about this issue already. I know we certainly heard about it from the Health Department when we had our budget hearing. So this would be a way to resolve that issue. I also had conversations with CPED director to understand how much money they really needed to roll out the Management Information Network System, known as MINS. There's a sense that with this $1.5 million, they can do almost all the work that they needed to do, or probably all the work that they need to do next year in terms of this. They're still working on the work plan. If you notice in the budget book, it says this money is even contingent on a work plan being developed with finance that they can agree to. So they're working that out. And if they need additional revenue, they probably won't need it until near the end of the year or next year, and it can put in next year's budget. So I think this is funding that might not necessarily be needed. I will say, and I'm going to move into the staff direction that's on the same page, if that's all right. We can move these separately, but I think I had a concern with this funding because it is only one-time funding, but there was it was also clear to me that we have some issues with our licensing fees. Some of the things that seem really obvious are if you have a liquor license, you don't have to actually get or pay anything extra for your food license, even though it requires additional staff, and depending on the restaurant that you have operating there, that seemed to be a problem. There's also some issues with how big an establishment is that may only need 1 license, yet they might have many vendors who are operating in the establishment. So with the recommendation of staff who helped develop this, and finance staff in particular, there's a staff direction that says we need to move forward with a study and to analyze this further so that moving forward, we're clear on what kind of revenues are required for us to do this work in terms of the fee structure. And this staff direction, with the hope then, would be to solve this problem moving forward in the 2019 budget and beyond. It's probably a lot more information than you wanted, but there it is. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I think I will take these as 2 separate items, although I appreciate them being introduced and spoken to at the one time, Councilmember. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to thank Councilmember Gordon for his partnership and work on this, as well as our staff. It's an important public health need, and I'm glad that we're addressing it.
Further questions on the first portion, excuse me. You don't need a demotion, but Mr. Ruff, if you could join us. You had a comment.
Sure, Mr. Chair. Just a comment on Mr. Gordon's or Councilmember Gordon's proposal, which is we did work with Councilmember Gordon on the staff direction because I just want to remind the council that the way we set fees is not part of the typical budget process. If you recall, I think there's a September 1st deadline on a public hearing and notice And at that time is when the council changes fees, and as has been discussed, we haven't changed fees for a number of years, so they have not been very controversial public hearings. But we have committed to the health department and worked with Councilmember Gordon on the staff direction to get this work done by April or May timeframe so that we can plan adequately for the timing of any potential fee increase next year to support these efforts. I would say that the decision on hiring these folks also could be done at that time rather than using one-time money, again, on the same basis of the discussion we had earlier, which is you are now committing, if you take action today, you are committing yourself to FTEs. And if the study comes back that there's not enough money or the decision is made not to increase the fees, then we have people who are hired who have then need to be terminated at that point in time. So my suggestion, just as would be certainly comfortable with the staff direction, but that we delay action on the funding until we get through this fee study and have a complete picture for the council and be able to bring it back to the council at that time.
Thank you, Mr. Ruff. Are there additional comments, questions on item number 1 of Councilmember Gordon Johnson amendment? Not seeing any. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item carries. On the staff direction, item number 2 on the Gordon Johnson amendment, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That item carries. Are there any additional items that people would like to bring forward at this point? Not seeing any. I will take that as a action that we'll be able to adjourn, and we'll return at 1:30 at the call of the chair. Excuse me?
Let's return at 1.
1 o'clock. Is that acceptable?
Mr. Chair, since we're not breaking at 12 but 11:30, can we meet at 12:30?
Is that? I know there were some potential conflicts with schedules. I just wanted to check in with people. Would
Well,
12:30 be an acceptable
I
time?
guess my question just is we have at least one and maybe a couple conversations happening for people. I can return, I'm here. I can come back at 12:30, but I know there are some folks who wanted to review options for modifying their motions, and so maybe some of those folks could say, would they rather do 12:30 or 1? So, we could always say 12:30, but
Right. Let's
so
let's try to do that. Let's go with 12:30, and if there's notice that we'll need longer, I'll extend it because it will be at the call of the chair. So we'll do 12:30 as the second after the afternoon session. Thank you, everybody. Good afternoon, everyone. I know there have been discussions happening around, but I understand that we still have some issues that are unresolved, so we have to take some specific actions today to make sure that we can address the mayor's recommended budget for 2018 on the Wednesday evening. So are there any additional motions that folks would like to make for this afternoon session? Not seeing any. There are 2 items that will remain on the table. So I think with that, I guess we've given consideration to all the previous amendments that we took up this morning for the 2018 budget. I'd like to move approval. Oh, so excuse me, Council President Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would it make sense to move forward without recommendation? I mean, is that a legitimate motion?
No, at this point, is my understanding, I think it would be better to let those 2 items die in committee, and then we'll be able to reintroduce everything as a solution at actual adoption evening. So we should just probably, unless you want to take action on any particular item, then we'd have to move to take something off the table.
So the 2 items that we want to resolve at this point are in what status?
Not resolved. So
Not resolved, and so do they fail? Is that my question? That's my question. What happens to them?
Well, technically, we could be considering a postponement, but there's no such action for postponing an item out of committee for the council meeting. So technically, they would fail in committee, die on the table as they were.
Okay. And then they can get reintroduced on
Yes,
Wednesday?
absolutely.
Okay.
That would be the place, that'd be an appropriate place to make a new motion. So any further questions on that? I just wanted to clarify. The intent isn't to, vote them down in this committee and then reintroduce them. We'd be just letting them expire and reintroduce them for the first time at the next, at the council meeting. So with that, I'd like to move approval of the mayor's recommended 2018 budget as further amended by this committee, and with a recommendation for adoption to the full city council at its adjourned session next Wednesday, December 6th, beginning at 6:05 is when the public hearing will start, and at the conclusion of that public hearing is when we'll take up the action as the adjourned city council meeting in this chamber on Wednesday, December 6th. Is there any discussion on that motion? All those in favor of that motion, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? That item carries. Thank you very much. With that, colleagues, we've concluded our business for this afternoon, and seeing no further business before the subcommittee, we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.